There is a wonderful time in a parent's life when their children believe anything they tell them. It's nice to be the most trusted person in your child's life. And we enjoyed that for a while. Most of you know we adopted two boys who were birth brothers, and they came to live with us in between their birthdays. They were born 51 weeks apart, and so one had just turned 5, and they came to live with us that week, and then the other turned 6 the following week. But I lost that high position of trust as soon as they started school. I warned you, Yvonne. Suddenly, their teachers knew more than Mom and Dad. And it wasn't long after that that they decided that everything on TV and in the newspaper and later on the internet was true. And I could not convince them that there was no authority making sure that everything on the internet was true. By age 30, we have, I think, developed a pretty healthy skepticism. We've been burned by advertisers, by stores, by mail order companies. Oh, this is the most wonderful product, and this is what it's going to do. And you think, oh yeah, I'll order that, and you get it, and it doesn't quite turn out like you expected. And so we develop a bit of skepticism about things, about what people are telling us. And for many of us, that carries over as well into church. But for some, there's an assumption that anything you hear at church, in a Bible study or from the pulpit, is the truth. And that is an assumption you should not make. You should not make that. Jesus warns us in the Sermon on the Mount against having that kind of an assumption. And we're looking at that subject this morning in Matthew chapter 7. But to set up the context, I want to back up a few verses at what Jesus said beginning in verse 13. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Jesus says that most people are on the wrong path in trying to get to life, to eternal life, to heaven. He says most people go the broad path, the easy path, the path that they see everybody else on. They tend to follow the crowds. Jesus warns that most people are on the wrong path. And in today's passage, he's going to warn us that there are those people who, for one reason or another, would get us sidetracked from the right path. It's a warning we need to heed. So we pick up with Jesus in Matthew chapter 7, beginning in verse 15. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. This is one of many passages in the Bible, even in the New Testament, that warn us against false prophets, false preachers, false teachers. Not everyone who rejects the truth is out there, outside of the church. There are many false teachers in churches in the church, the universal church. Not necessarily every local church, but in any local church, there can be a false teacher. It might be a pastor, it might be a preacher, it might be a visiting evangelist. It could be any member of the church. So we must always be on guard against false teaching. In the day we live in, there are several things we need to be on guard against. One of the things we need to be constantly on guard against is those who want to get our personal information or money. So every time you get an email, then you don't know who it came from, and it has a link in there. We're warned, don't click on that link if you don't know where it came from. It could take you to a damaging site. It could bring unwanted software to your computer. You can get text the same way. You get those phone calls, those phishing phone calls, every week, every day on the phone. I love the lady that goes, "This is your MasterCard Visa account," like they're connected or something. One of these days they'll probably figure that out, but so far they're not. We must always be on guard also against false teaching, false Christian teaching, against those who would lead us astray. Why do people fall for such things? Why do people fall for that? Why do people follow false teachers? Let me give you several suggestions of why people, even Christians, might be led astray by false teaching. The first is that some people are attracted to the crowds. Jesus said most people are going the easy path, the wide gate, the broad path. There are some people that follow the crowd. Whatever the way the crowd is going, that's where they're going to go, even if the message is false, which they may not realize. If you realize it's false, you wouldn't go that way. Some people are attracted to the smooth, confident speaker. They're more focused on how the teacher teaches than the message being taught. Maybe the speaker is entertaining. Maybe he's a joke teller. I know some preachers that use a lot of humor in their sermons. They're very entertaining. There are preachers who are good storytellers, and they have a good story, a long story that feeds the sermon, personal story or something else. And false teachers are good at those things too. And so some people are attracted by the smooth, confident speaker. Some people are attracted to the latest ideas. The latest ideas. They like new teachings. Paul encountered that in the scriptures, in the book of Acts, in the city of Athens. There were a group of guys that sat around. We're just interested in the next new idea. And they would hear those, and they would debate those, and then, they get tired of that, and they go on to the next new thing. And there are some people, some Christians, who get tired of the same old truths of Scripture, even the ones that have to do with our salvation. They want to hear something new. They're attracted by the next new thing, the latest theological fad. And in 40 years of ministry, I've heard and been in contact with some of these fads that come along. And they last for a while, and there's books written and articles written, and people are debating, and then they kind of fade out because something new comes along. And none of them are the gospel. None of them are the truth. There's some truth there, but not a lot. Some people are attracted to controversy. And some of these false teachers know that. And so they're always talking controversy. They're stirring things up. They're trying to get people to argue with each other. They kind of feed on that, and there are people that feed on that. There are people that like controversy, and they're attracted to those who are stirring things up. And then some people are attracted to conspiracies. And so there are some false teachers, and they're constantly throwing out conspiracies of all kinds because people are drawn to that. They know they're going to get followers. They blame the Jews, the government, the poor, the rich, the educated, the ignorant, the devil for all of their misfortunes. And some people flock to the preachers of conspiracies. And you may have recognized some tendencies toward one of those or more of those in these last few moments. Therefore, we need to look for the patterns of false preachers, false prophets, false teachers. We need to look for the patterns. Let me suggest several patterns this morning. The first kind of false prophet is the most obvious. They openly deny a key Christian truth. They openly deny a key Christian truth. This showed up early in church history. There were those who would preach Jesus, but they said Jesus wasn't really a man, he was just God. He was just God. We believe, Orthodox Christianity is that Jesus was both fully God and fully man. But in the beginning, many denied that he was man, that he was God. They denied the deity of Jesus, said he's not God, he's just a man. And others said he was God and not a man, and that he wasn't a man, he didn't really die on the cross. He just appeared to die on the cross. So they deny some key aspect of Christianity. And I have encountered some today who deny, some preachers who deny the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The second false prophet is a bit harder to recognize. Some emphasize only one side of the gospel. Usually, they only present the good news and they leave out the bad news. Many a preacher emphasizes the good news and never mentions the bad news. Remember, it's the bad news that makes the good news good. That's right. The bad news is that we are all sinners bound for hell unless somebody comes up with a solution to that problem, which of course God did in Jesus Christ. These preachers major on the things that are more positive sounding, the things that people want to hear. They most emphasize God's grace and his kindness and his compassion and his mercy and his love, and they neglect God's jealousy and justice and wrath. They teach heaven and never hell. They teach Jesus as our Savior, but rarely mention Jesus as a Lord that you have to bow to and submit to. They stress believing and rarely, if ever, mention repenting. They leave out what is unpopular. They ignore what is negative. The pastor of the biggest so-called church in America is one of these preachers. He never says anything negative, rarely ever mentions the word sin or hell. There are a few other preachers in this category that take the flip side. They emphasize most all the time the negative things. They're haranguing their listeners as sinners, emphasizing God's anger and wrath. You rarely hear them talk about the love and forgiveness of God. Some of you remember the old Disney movie, Pollyanna? You remember the preacher in that story, in the movie? He was one of these. Every week he got there angry and haranguing the people for being dirty, rotten sinners. That wasn't just a caricature. There are preachers in our world, in America today, like that. So how do we be on guard against such preaching? Well, we need to know the truth. To spot false teaching, we must be very familiar with the truth. And the fact is, many Christians just don't know the truth that well. They don't know the gospel that well. They don't know the New Testament that well. While I can easily tell monopoly money from real money, if you gave me a counterfeit dollar bill, I probably couldn't tell you that it's counterfeit. I don't look at the bills that closely. I go to the bank, I go to the store, they give me bills, I put them in my wallet. I only look at them to make sure that they're all one side up and 20s, 10s, 5s, 1s. And when I give them out, I don't look closely at them. I don't know how many numbers are supposed to be in that serial number, how many digits in that. Couldn't tell you. I don't know all the things that are supposed to be there, whether it's the old bills or the new bills with that little thing on it and the shiny stuff. And I don't know. If you take it and I buy my coffee, that's good. I'm happy. Many Christians bring that same attitude to the Bible. They bring that same attitude to the Bible. They really don't read the Bible much. Well, I read my Sunday school lesson. I read my Bible study, whatever was assigned in the Bible study lesson. I read what the preacher preaches on, but other than that, I don't really read the Bible. How many books of the New Testament have you never read? Just sit down and read. You ever read the whole Bible? I mean, I can understand, getting stuck in Leviticus, parts of Numbers, some of those. The minor prophets can be really confusing. Parts of Isaiah, even some of the Psalms just kind of get depressing after a while. But the New Testament, have you ever read all of the New Testament? We don't know our Bibles well enough to recognize false teaching when we hear it. Your small understanding of the Christian faith will be revealed when you are led astray by false teaching. This subject came up in our Sunday school class this morning, not about this per se, but we were studying Esther, and to fill in the details, the king wanted Queen Vashti to appear. She had her banquet going on for the women, and he had a banquet going on for the men. And after a week of feasting and wine and maybe getting drunk, he decided, we want the queen. I want the queen to come in here and put her crown on so everybody knows she's the queen. And I want all these guys to see how beautiful she is. That's the story. That's what's revealed in the scripture. But some of the commentaries in the study Bibles that the people were using in the class said that what he wanted her to do was to come in with just the crown on. And that's what Jewish tradition, not the scriptures, but Jewish tradition has, one of the things that Jewish tradition has passed down over the years, that's what the story really was. But the Bible doesn't say that. But some of the commentaries of the study Bibles that people were using in class said that. And so the question was, how do we know what we can trust in these commentaries? Doesn't anybody make sure these commentaries are right? And I said, well, no. They're editors of those materials. But all of the Bible translations and these study Bibles especially are printed by publishing companies who are trying to make money. And so, it's going to have a lot of things in there that aren't necessarily true, that someone decided was true or might be true, and sometimes they're presented that way and would be in there. We all need to be reading the Bible, especially the New Testament, to be learning what it teaches about our salvation so that we can recognize error when we hear it. Another kind of false prophet takes longer to see. Look again at Matthew 7, verse 15. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. They come looking like sheep, but inside they're ferocious wolves. They appear to be serving Jesus, but in reality they're serving themselves. Their teaching may be about Jesus, but their intent is to gain something for themselves. It may be money, it may be prestige, it may be power, it may be influence, it may be followers. And you won't be able to tell just by what they say. You'll have to look at their character. You'll have to look at what they do, not when they're in the pulpit, not when they're teaching. Some teach Christian truth, but don't live it. And they don't live it because they may not believe it. Again, they're con men. They're trying to get something over on you. They may preach the correct message. They may preach all of the gospel, leaving nothing out, but they're not living it. They're not believing it. They will not exhibit the character of Christ in their dealings with individuals. And so you are only going to find out that they're false teachers when you are actually in contact with them outside of a formal setting. In those one-on-one conversations, when you have a question or you have a problem, or this thing happened in the church, I don't think it should be done that way. I can't tell looking at an apple what it's like on the inside. I eat an apple or half an apple almost every day. It just works well in my system. But you don't know, looking at the outside of an apple, even feeling it in your hand, whether it's crisp or mealy. And I hate mealy apples. You can't tell by looking at it what it's like. Jesus speaks in his parable about good fruit. Good fruit. Bad fruit. Good teachers, bad teachers. Good trees, bad trees. Their badness will become evident the more you are around them. Listen to their conversation, especially when they're criticized, when they're stressed, when they're angry. That's when their true self will become most evident. We must be fruit inspectors. That's what Jesus is calling us to do, be fruit inspectors. But many Christians don't know what good fruit looks like. They don't know what to look for. Some think that good fruit is simply a crowd. If a preacher's got a crowd, that's good fruit. He must be a good preacher. He must be a good teacher. Must be true. That's not necessarily true. There's lots of ways to get a crowd. A crowd of Christians, a crowd of non-Christians, a mixed crowd. There's lots of ways to get a crowd. Years ago, there was a church in Texas or someplace, and I mean, this was like when I first came, this story, 30 some years ago. And the preacher promised that if he got so many people, so much money for a project, or so many people attendance for something, he'd preach his next sermon from the rooftop. And so they did. The people rallied together. They got all this money. They got all these people. And he got up on the roof and preached a sermon one Sunday. Made the headlines. It was all over the newspapers and stuff. And for good or ill, I told you I would never preach a sermon from the roof. So I could do that stuff. But there's lots of ways to get a crowd. You can fire people up in lots of different ways, not all of them having to do with preaching the gospel. So just having a crowd isn't necessarily good fruit. And some people think that having lots of baptisms is good fruit. You figure if the church is baptizing people regularly, then that's good fruit. And it may be. But it's fairly easy to get people baptized too. You start telling people that you get baptized, you're in heaven. And some of our children believe that for a while. I have turned down at least a dozen children over the years in our church when they first came to me and said, I want to get baptized. And the reason I did so is because you talk to them, they don't know what a Christian is. They don't see themselves as sinners. They don't understand what baptism is about. So no, I didn't baptize them. But there are churches out there, there are preachers out there, they'll baptize anybody that says, I want to get baptized. And they don't ask any questions. Yeah, we'd be glad to baptize you. So some people think baptisms are it, but that's not necessarily true. Baptisms may not be good fruit. And note, Jesus emphasizes the quality of the fruit, not the quantity of the fruit. He emphasizes good fruit, not much fruit. A whole bushel of mealy apples is still bad fruit, no matter how much you have of them. Don't just look to numbers. Look to character. Bad character will come out in those one-on-one conversations. You'll hear something that doesn't sound right. Maybe he tells off-color jokes in private conversation. Maybe he puts others down constantly. Maybe he gossips. I had a pastor friend who's always gossiping about somebody else. So I was very careful about what I told him about me. He'll tell you something that shocks you. And if you confront him, he'll give you some excuse, he'll laugh it off, or maybe he'll attack you. I have encountered such behavior in other pastors before. Maybe you've been in kind of a situation like that at work. A boss or a coworker has let down his guard and showed you his true colors, his true character. And the danger signals were going off in your heart, and you didn't know quite how to respond, especially if it was your boss. Maybe you experienced this as a teenager. The cool group let you in and you felt accepted, but then they showed their true colors. And they wanted you to do something that you knew wasn't right. And maybe you courageously walked away, or maybe they led you into doing something sinful. The bad fruit might concern a mishandling of money. It might show up in constantly being late. It might show up in never apologizing when appropriate, in trying to always be the center of attention, in failing to show any humility, any grace, any compassion. This is the kind of bad fruit Jesus is warning about. Listen to the message. Make sure it's true, but also look at the character. Look for humility. Look for honesty. Look for integrity. Look for sincerity. Look for Christian compassion and kindness and mercy and forgiveness. Become a student of character and teach your children to read character in others. That's the way to find a good friend or a good spouse. Teach your children to read people, not by their looks or their clothes, but by their character. They will need that knowledge the rest of their lives. Let us heed what Jesus says and guard ourselves from false teachers. Let us learn fully the salvation we say we believe. And let us learn to obey him so that we can bear good fruit as well.